In 1990, America was suffering from a national condition called the Vietnam Syndrome. This wasn't a medical issue, more of a political one. It meant the public had a severe and frankly quite reasonable allergy to getting bogged down in foreign wars for nebulous reasons. So when Saddam Hussein, a man the US had been quite friendly with during his war with Iran, decided to invade his tiny, oil-rich neighbor Kuwait, it was an awkward situation. George H.W. Bush had a problem. How do you sell a war to a public that remembers body bags and napalm on the evening news? You can't just say oil, even though everyone's thinking it. You need a story, a really, really good one. You need a villain who isn't just a geopolitical nuisance, but a monster. And you need a public relations firm, preferably the biggest in the world, to help you tell it. The stage was being set not for a war, but for a marketing campaign with a budget of millions and a body count as a potential side effect.
Enter Nai Raya, a 15-year-old girl who testified before the Congressional Human Rights Caucus on October 10, 1990. With tears in her eyes, she described a horrific scene. Iraqi soldiers storming a Kuwaiti hospital, taking babies out of incubators and leaving them on the cold floor to die. It was pure, unadulterated evil. It was the story the Bush administration needed. It was cited by the president himself 6 times in the lead-up to the war. There was just one tiny, insignificant detail they forgot to mention. Nairaya wasn't just some random volunteer. She was Nairaya al-Sabah, the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. Her testimony was coached by specialists from the PR firm Hill & Knowlton, hired by a front group called Citizens for a Free Kuwait, which was itself funded by the Kuwaiti royal family. The whole thing was a performance, a focus-grouped, brilliantly executed piece of emotional theater designed to turn public opinion. And it worked perfectly.
Hill and Knowlton didn't come cheap. Their contract with Citizens for a Free Kuwait was worth about $10.7 million. That's over $22 million in today's money. For that price, you don't just get a press release, you get a fully managed perception molding machine. They conducted extensive studies to find which arguments would best sell the war to Americans. They discovered that comparing Saddam to Hitler was a big winner. They produced video news releases that looked like real journalism and sent them to TV stations, who often aired them uncut. They printed t-shirts, held rallies, and created a narrative so compelling that it convinced not just the public, but senators and international bodies. The incubator story wasn't an isolated lie. It was the flagship product of a comprehensive marketing strategy. The goal wasn't to inform. The goal was to achieve a specific policy outcome, and the truth was, at best, a secondary concern. This wasn't statecraft, it was brand management, and the brand was war. Once the war started, the information control went into overdrive. The Pentagon, having learned its lesson from Vietnam, where journalists roamed relatively freely, created something called the media pool system. This sounded collaborative. It was not. A small group of reporters were selected, escorted everywhere by military minders, and their reports were subject to security review before release. They saw what the military wanted them to see, which was usually a lot of impressive hardware and very little chaos or bloodshed. It was less like war reporting and more like a very dangerous state-sponsored corporate retreat. Journalists who tried to operate outside this system were detained, had their equipment confiscated, or were simply kicked out of the country. The result was that the American public received a steady diet of pre-approved, sanitized information. The fog of war was no accident. It was a carefully constructed smokescreen.
The visual story of the Gulf War was mesmerizing. It was the first major conflict broadcast live on 24-hour news channels like CNN. And what they showed was incredible. Green-tinted night vision footage, the sleek, alien shape of the F-117 Nighthawk stealth bomber, and most famously, the videos from the noses of smart bombs as they precisely, cleanly, and almost satisfyingly glided down to strike a building. It looked like a video game. There were no screams, no blood, no dismembered bodies, just a puff of smoke and a satisfying explosion. This is when the term collateral damage really entered the public vocabulary. It's a wonderful bit of jargon, isn't it? It's the kind of sterile, bureaucratic language you use when you want to talk about dead civilians without actually having to picture them. The war became a technological spectacle, a demonstration of American might that was as entertaining as it was terrifying. Of course, the reality was a little different from the highlight reel. Those smart bombs that never missed, they made up only about 7% of the total bombs dropped. The other 93% were good old-fashioned dumb bombs, which had a hit rate of about 1 in 4. And the targets weren't always military. Civilian infrastructure, power grids, water treatment plants, bomb shelters was systematically destroyed. One of the most horrific incidents, the bombing of the Amiria shelter in Baghdad, which killed over 400 civilians, was initially described by the military as a strike on a command and control center. Then there was the Highway of Death, a 7-mile stretch of road from Kuwait to Iraq where retreating Iraqi soldiers and civilian hostages were annihilated by air power. Photos of the scene look apocalyptic, with charred vehicles and bodies littering the road. But you didn't see much of that on television. It didn't fit the clean war narrative. It was bad for the brand. Every good show needs a star, and for Operation Desert Storm, that star was General Norman Schwarzkopf. Stormin' Norman was perfect for the role. He was imposing, authoritative, but with a folksy, no-nonsense charm. His press briefings were masterpieces of information control disguised as transparent updates. He used simple analogies, powerful charts, and a commanding tone to walk the press through the flawless execution of the war. He'd point to maps and talk about Hail Mary passes and end runs, framing the conflict like a football game. It was reassuring. It made a chaotic, violent event seem orderly and under control. He became a national hero, a celebrity general. The public trusted him implicitly, not realizing that he was also the lead salesman for the Pentagon's version of the truth. He wasn't just reporting on the war, he was shaping the public's entire perception of it in real time. After the victory parades and the yellow ribbons came the journalistic equivalent of a nasty hangover. The incubator story was thoroughly debunked. An ABC News report by John Martin and investigations by Amnesty International revealed the testimony was a fabrication. Turns out, Amnesty had initially backed the story, which shows just how effective the PR campaign was. It fooled everyone. The Pentagon's claims about the incredible accuracy of its weapons were also revised downward significantly. But by then, it didn't matter. The war was over.
1. Public opinion had been successfully managed when it counted. There were no real consequences for Hill and Knowlton or for the officials who knowingly used the false testimony. And the most important outcome was that a new template was created. It proved that with enough money and a well-crafted narrative, you could sell almost any military intervention to a democratic public. A lesson that would be remembered just over a decade later.
The Gulf War didn't just liberate Kuwait. It fundamentally changed the relationship between the media, the military, and the public. It perfected the art of the sanitized, televised conflict. It taught a generation of military and political leaders that information is a weapon system, just as valuable as a tank or a fighter jet. The embedded journalist program used in the 2003 Iraq invasion was a direct descendant of the Gulf War's media pools. The 24-hour news cycle learned that war, when packaged correctly, is fantastic for ratings. We learned to be suspicious, but we also learned to consume conflict as a spectacle. The lines between journalism, propaganda, and entertainment became permanently, perhaps hopelessly, blurred. So the next time you see perfectly clean footage of a missile strike on the news, it's worth asking not just what you're seeing, but what you're not seeing. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!